I needed the money by tomorrow morning. That's what my son Brandon said as he walked into my kitchen that Tuesday, barely looking at me as he slid a thick manila envelope across my breakfast table. His expensive watch caught the morning sunlight streaming through the window, the same window where I used to watch him play as a little boy in our Scottsdale backyard. "Morning, Mom," he muttered, already scrolling through his phone with one hand while the other gestured vaguely at the envelope. No hug, no real greeting, just business, like always. I set down my tea, the chamomile still steaming in my favorite mug, the one with the faded Arizona sunset printed on it. My hands trembled slightly as I reached for the envelope. At 68 years old, I'd learned to recognize the tone in Brandon's voice when he wanted something. It was the same tone his father Robert had used for 3 decades of our marriage. "What's this about?" I asked, though I already knew the answer wouldn't be. Brandon finally looked up his phone, his jaw tight. He had Robert's eyes, that same cold calculation when money was involved. Heather made some bad investments, got herself into a situation. He pushed the envelope closer. "Open it." Inside were bank statements, collection notices, and a loan agreement with a number highlighted in red. My retirement fund, nearly everything I had left after selling the house in Phoenix when Robert died 5 years ago. My heart hammered against my ribs. "Brandon, this is almost everything I have." He took a sip of the coffee I'd poured him without asking, without thanking. "Mom, you don't need that much. You live alone in this house that's paid off. Your expenses are minimal, and let's be honest, you're 68. What are you saving it for?" The words hit me like a slap. Like I was already dead to him. Just a bank account with a pulse. "It's not that simple," I started, my throat tight. "I have medical bills, prescriptions, property taxes." "Heather screwed up. Okay?" Brandon's voice rose, cutting me off. "She trusted the wrong person. If we don't pay this by tomorrow morning, things are going to get really bad. These aren't bank people, Mom. These are dangerous people." The kitchen suddenly felt smaller, the walls closing in. "What kind of dangerous people?" "You don't details." He stood up, pacing across my kitchen tiles like a caged animal. "You just need to trust me. It's a loan, okay? I'll pay you back as soon as I restructure the company finances." I'd heard that before. 3 years ago, it was $80,000 for a business expansion that never happened. Before that, $40,000 for supplier problems. I'd never seen a single dollar returned. "Brandon, you've asked for loans before." "I haven't. This is serious, Mom." His voice went cold, dangerous. "This isn't the time for drama. I'm your only son, your family. You always said you'd do anything for me." There it was, the manipulation I knew so well. The same weapon Robert had wielded, the same guilt I'd carried my entire adult life. Family, duty, sacrifice. But something inside me was different this morning. Maybe it was the way Brandon looked at me, not as his mother, but as an ATM. Maybe it was the memory of all those other loans, all those broken promises. Or maybe it was just that after 68 years of putting everyone else first, I was finally desperately tired. "I need to think about this," I heard myself say. Brandon's face hardened. "There's no time to think. I need that money in my account before the end of the day. Tomorrow is too late." He moved behind my chair, placing his hands on my shoulders. I felt their weight like chains. "Mom, you know I wouldn't ask if it wasn't important. This is for Heather's safety. For our family's safety. Family." That magic word that had controlled me for so long. "Okay," I whispered, barely recognizing my own voice. "I'll transfer it." The relief on Brandon's face was immediate. He smiled for the first time since arriving. That smile that reminded me of the little boy he used to be. "Thank you, Mom. I knew I could count on you." He checked his Rolex. "I have a meeting now, but I'll be back tonight for dinner to sort everything out. Around 7? I nodded, unable to speak. He kissed my forehead quickly, grabbed the envelope, and headed for the door. "Don't disappoint me, Mom," he added, as if I were the child and he were the parent. The door slammed shut. Through the window, I watched his Tesla speed out of my driveway, kicking up dust from the desert landscaping I'd carefully maintained for years. I sat alone in my kitchen, with his half-empty coffee cup, and the crushing weight of what I'd just agreed to. My hands were shaking as I picked up my phone, but instead of calling the bank, I dialed a number I hadn't used in months. "Patty? It's Dorothy. I need your help. My friend arrived in under 30 minutes. Patricia Henderson and I had met at Arizona State University nearly 50 years ago. She'd gone on to become a successful attorney, while I'd dropped out to marry Robert. Patty had never approved of my choices, but she'd always been there, patiently waiting for me to open my eyes. $250,000? Patty nearly choked on the tea I'd served her. "Dorothy, that's insane. That's everything you have." I shook my head, feeling the full weight of reality. "It's not the first time, Patty. Last year it was $80,000 for the business. Before that, $40,000 for supplier problems. I've never seen that money again." Patty set her cup down hard on my kitchen table. "Why do you keep giving it to him, Dorothy? You were always smart. How can you not see what's happening?" The question pierced through me. Why did I keep doing this? Love? Fear? Habit? "He's my son," I answered automatically. "And you're his mother, not his bank," Patty shot back. "Robert manipulated you for 30 years. And now Brandon is following the same playbook. When does this stop?" I looked out the window at the garden I'd cultivated alone after Robert's death. The roses were finally blooming after years of trying to grow them in soil that wasn't quite right. Like me, they'd persisted against all odds. "Today," I said, surprising myself. "It stops today." Patty stared at me, confused. "What do you mean?" I took a deep breath, feeling something inside me break apart and reassemble. "I want you to help me transfer all my money to an account Brandon doesn't know about, and I want you to help me leave this house before he comes back tonight." Patty's eyes widened. Then a slow smile spread across her face. "Dorothy Mitchell, I've been waiting almost 50 years to hear you say something like that." She pulled out her phone. "I have a vacation condo in San Diego that's sitting empty. The keys are in my office. How long do we have before he returns?" He said 7 o'clock. "So about 10 hours. Patty checked her watch. "Plenty of time. We'll hit the bank first, then the notary so you can give me power of attorney for legal representation. After that, we pack your bags and get you out." I stood up, feeling a mixture of terror and exhilaration I'd never experienced before. In my entire life, I'd never made a decision this radical. "He's going to be furious," I murmured, more to myself than to Patty. She took my hands in hers. "Dorothy, are you afraid of him?" I thought about Brandon's face when he didn't get what he wanted. The way his voice changed, how his eyes went cold. Just like Robert's. "Yes," I admitted. "The same way I was afraid of his father." "Then it's time to stop being afraid." Patty squeezed my hands. "Let's go get your things." I walked to my bedroom and pulled out the suitcase I'd only used twice in the last 10 years. Opening my closet, I began selecting clothes, but quickly realized I didn't want to take much from this old life. Just essentials, a few outfits, my medications, important documents, and the small amount of jewelry that had sentimental value. At the back of my dresser drawer, I found the small wooden box where I kept the only money Robert never knew I had. It wasn't much, a few $1,000s I'd saved over the years, selling homemade preserves and quilts at local craft fairs. My secret. My small rebellion. I took the photo frame with my mother's picture and hesitated over Brandon's childhood photo. After a moment, I decided to leave it behind. When I returned to the living room, Patty was on the phone organizing everything. "Flight to San Diego is booked for 3 o'clock. We still have time for the bank and notary." At the bank, the manager seemed surprised by my request to transfer everything to a new account. "Mrs. Mitchell, are you sure? This is a considerable amount." "Absolutely," I replied, signing the documents. "And I need this transaction not to appear on statements sent to my residential address." While we waited for the transfer to process, Patty looked at me curiously. What are you going to leave, Brandon? Any explanation? I thought for a moment. A note, I decided, and a lesson he should have learned long ago. Back at the house, I carefully wrote on a piece of paper and left it on the kitchen table. The disappointed one is me. Revenge is a dish served cold. Don't look for me. As I walked out the door with my suitcase, I looked back at the house that had been my prison for so many years. In the garden, the roses swayed in the desert breeze, free and strong, just like I would be from this day forward. In the taxi to the airport, Patty took my hand. Are you okay? I watched the city pass by quickly through the window, carrying away decades of submission. No, I answered honestly, but I will be. But what I didn't know then was that the real shock was still to come, and my decision to disappear would set off a chain of events that would change not just my life, but the lives of everyone around me in ways I never could have imagined. Patty's condo in San Diego was small but welcoming, with an ocean view that took my breath away. The first night, sitting on the balcony listening to the waves, I turned on my phone only to immediately turn it off again when I saw 17 missed calls from Brandon. I wasn't ready to face him yet. He'll find you eventually, Patty said as she poured us both a glass of wine. We need a long-term plan. I nodded, feeling strangely calm. I never thought I'd have the courage to do this. I always knew you had it, Patty smiled. You just needed a push. Over the following days, my phone continued ringing. Brandon, his wife Heather, even my sister Claudia, who'd probably been recruited to try to locate me. In one of the voicemails, Brandon alternated between desperate pleas and veiled threats. Mom, please call me. I'm worried about you. Then, in the same message, you can't just disappear like this. The house is in my name. Remember? Think carefully about what you're doing. That last part made me pause. The house. Robert had put it in Brandon's name years ago, for estate planning purposes. I just abandoned the one asset I had left. A week after my escape, I started rebuilding my life. I opened an account at a new bank, rented a small apartment near the beach, and started looking for something to occupy my time. At 68, I'd never really worked, but I discovered that my preserves and quilts had a market at local craft fairs. Patty remained in Scottsdale, but became my eyes and ears. She was the one who told me about Brandon's furious visit to her office. He was beside himself, she recounted over the phone, demanding to know where you were, threatening to sue, saying you weren't mentally capable of making financial decisions. What did you tell him? I asked. I told him you were perfectly sane, and if he continued with the threats, I'd file a restraining order. Patty laughed. He turned red as a tomato. I don't think anyone's ever stood up to him before. At the end of the first month, I received a formal letter from Brandon's attorney. It demanded my immediate return, alleging concern for my mental health and threatening legal action to have me declared incompetent. In the same envelope was a handwritten note from Heather, surprisingly humble. Dorothy, please come back. Brandon is out of control. The creditors are pressing us. We need you. I handed the documents to Patty, who took care of responding formally, attaching recent medical reports, proving my sanity, and a detailed statement of the loans Brandon had extorted from me over the years. They don't have a case, Patty assured me. But Brandon won't give up easily. He lost his personal bank, and that infuriates him. In the second month, I received an unexpected visit. My daughter-in-law Heather appeared at my new apartment, pale and noticeably thinner. How did you find me? I asked, surprised to see her at my door. We hired a detective, she admitted, looking embarrassed. Can I come in? I hesitated, but ultimately let her in. Heather looked around my small apartment with curiosity. It's cozy, she commented, clearly surprised to see me living in such a modest space after the spacious house I'd left behind. It's mine, I replied simply. We sat on the small balcony, the ocean visible in the distance. Heather held her cup with trembling hands. Things are bad, Dorothy, she finally said. Brandon is different, aggressive, losing control. How are my grandchildren? I asked, feeling a pang of guilt. Scared. They don't understand what's happening. Brandon sold his car. We're trying to sell the beach condo. Everything to pay the debts. She paused. It wasn't just the $250,000, Dorothy. There's much more. I wasn't surprised. Robert had always had another hidden debt too. So you didn't come here to convince me to return, I stated. You came to ask for more money. Heather looked down. It's more complicated than that. The people we owe aren't patient. Brandon told them you have the money. A chill ran down my spine. He used me as collateral. Heather didn't respond, but her silence was confirmation enough. You need to leave that house, Heather, I said, taking her hands. Take the kids and go to your parents' house. It's not that simple, she murmured. Brandon controls everything. Our accounts, our documents. Her voice broke. I don't know how to leave. The same way I didn't know, I said quietly. Until I finally found the courage. Her words moved me deeply. It was true. For decades I hadn't known how to leave, how to break the cycle, until I finally found courage. I can help you, I offered. Not with money, but to get out. Heather looked at me with a mixture of hope and fear. He'll find us, like he found you. Then we'll be prepared when that happens, I replied with a confidence I'd never felt before. But first we need to get you and the kids out of that house. After Heather left, with a plan sketched out, and my new phone number, carefully hidden in her shoe, I sat on the balcony watching the sunset. The orange horizon seemed like a symbol of my own transformation. From darkness to light. My phone rang. It was Patty. Heather found you, right? She asked without preamble. How did you know? Brandon showed up at my office again, this time with one of his creditors, a terrifying man with scars on his face. They made veiled threats, wanting to know where you were. I felt my stomach sink. What did you tell them? I said if they touched a hair on you, me, or anyone related to this case, I'd make sure they spent the rest of their lives behind bars. Patty paused. Dorothy, this is getting dangerous. Brandon is desperate. I know, I replied, watching the last ray of sun disappear on the horizon. And desperate people do desperate things. What I didn't realize was that things were about to get much worse before they got better. And that the real battle was just beginning. The next morning, I woke up to insistent knocking on my door. For a terrifying moment, I thought Brandon had found me. But when I looked through the peephole, I saw an unfamiliar woman. Mrs. Dorothy Mitchell? She asked when I opened the door partially, keeping the security chain latched. Yes, I'm Detective Rachel Morgan. She showed a badge. Phoenix PD. We need to talk about your son, Brandon Mitchell. My heart raced. Did something happen to him? The detective kept her expression neutral. May I come in? I let her in and offered coffee, which she accepted. While I prepared cups in the small kitchen, I tried to control the trembling in my hands. Mrs. Mitchell, the detective began, sitting on my sofa. Your son is being investigated for financial fraud, document forgery, and possible involvement with illegal loan sharks. We'd like to know if you had knowledge of these activities. I felt like the floor had disappeared beneath my feet. Part of me had always known Brandon wasn't honest in his business dealings, just like his father hadn't been, but hearing the words police investigation made it all terrifyingly real. No, I answered honestly. I knew he had financial problems, but not the extent or nature of them. The detective made notes in her pad. You left home suddenly 2 months ago, correct? Can you tell us why? I told her everything. The successive loans, the manipulations, the pressure for the $250,000. The detective listened without interrupting, only making occasional notes. Did he use your name on any documents? Did he ask you to sign papers without explaining what they were? I thought for a moment. A few years ago he asked me to sign some documents to facilitate financial transfers in case I needed help. He said it was for my protection in old age. The detective nodded. We found several suspicious transactions and accounts opened in your name, Mrs. Mitchell. Accounts you probably didn't know existed. I closed my eyes, feeling a wave of nausea. Brandon hadn't just manipulated me, he'd stolen my identity. What happens now? I asked, trying to maintain composure. We'll continue the investigation. Your formal statement will be needed soon. She hesitated. I should warn you that your son will probably be charged in the coming weeks. And considering the people he's gotten involved with, it would be wise to strengthen your security. After the detective left, I called Patty, who promised to fly to San Diego on the next flight. I always knew Brandon was involved in shady things, she said, but I never imagined it would go this far. That afternoon, I received a text from Heather. He discovered our plan. I'm locked in the bedroom with the kids. He's breaking everything. My blood ran cold. I immediately called Detective Morgan, who promised to send a patrol to Brandon's address. The following hours were a blur of calls, messages, and fragmented updates. By nightfall, I only knew that Heather and my grandchildren were safe in a shelter, and that Brandon had been detained for questioning after resisting police intervention. Patty arrived around 9 in the evening, finding me on the balcony, staring at the dark ocean. She sat beside me in silence for several minutes. "How are you feeling?" she finally asked. "Guilty," I admitted. "If I hadn't left, maybe this wouldn't have happened." Patty shook her head firmly. "No, Dorothy. If you hadn't left, you'd be sinking with him, probably being used for more fraudulent schemes." She took my hand. "You did the only thing you could have done. You saved yourself. And by doing that, you probably saved Heather and your grandchildren too. But the nightmare wasn't over yet. In fact, the most dangerous part was just about to begin." The next morning, the local paper's headline left me breathless. Scottsdale businessman arrested for fraud and ties to criminal organization. Brandon's photo, being led away in handcuffs, seemed to belong to another reality, not mine. The phone rang. It was Detective Morgan. "Mrs. Mitchell, your son is requesting your presence at the station. He insists on speaking only with you." I looked at Patty, who'd already read the news and was watching me with concern. "You don't have to go," she said. "After everything he's done." "Yes, I do," I interrupted, surprising myself. I need to look him in the eyes and end this once and for all. The police station was a cold, impersonal place, with fluorescent lights that highlighted every wrinkle on my tired face. Brandon was brought to a visitation room, handcuffed and wearing a gray uniform that made him look smaller, older. When he saw me, his eyes, so much like his father's, filled with tears. "Mom," he said, his voice broken. "You came." I sat across from him, maintaining distance. "You wanted to see me. I'm here." Brandon looked like a cornered animal, glancing around as if searching for an exit. "Don't you understand the situation I'm in?" he began, leaning forward. "These people don't play games. If I don't pay what I owe—" "No," I interrupted, my voice surprisingly firm. "You don't understand the situation you're in. I'm not here to give you money, Brandon. That time is over." His face changed, vulnerability giving way to rage. "You abandoned me when I needed you most. Your own family. Is that what you're going to tell your grandchildren? That you let their father rot in jail?" I took a deep breath, refusing to be manipulated again. "I'll tell them their father made bad decisions, just like their grandfather did. And that I finally made a right decision." Brandon slammed his handcuffed hands on the table. "The house is in my name. You have nothing. I have myself," I replied, standing up. "Something I almost lost completely because of men like you and your father." I walked to the door, then stopped and turned around. "Heather and the kids are safe. They'll have a chance to start over. Away from you." I paused. "And so will I." As I left the police station, I felt like an enormous weight had been lifted from my shoulders. The San Diego sun shone brightly, almost blinding after the artificial lighting of the station. Patty was waiting in the car. "How did it go?" she asked with concern. I looked one last time at the gray building where I'd left my son and decades of submission. "Liberating," I replied. And for the first time in a long time, I smiled a real smile. But I should have known that Brandon would try one more time to control me, even from behind bars, and his next move would be the most dangerous yet. 6 months passed since my escape, and Brandon's arrest. Winter came to San Diego, bringing strong winds and rough seas. My small apartment now truly felt like a home, with plants on the balcony, and the colorful quilts I sold at the local fair, adorning the walls. Heather and my grandchildren, Tyler age 8 and Emma age 6, had moved to a town in inland California near her family. We spoke weekly by video call, a technology I'd learned to master with Patty's help. The kids were adapting well to their new life, though they still asked about their father occasionally. "Grandma, when can we visit you?" Tyler asked during our last conversation. "In July for vacation," I promised. "We'll build sandcastles and search for shells on the beach." Heather's face appeared on the screen, smiling shyly. She looked healthier now, her cheeks fuller and her gaze calmer. "Are you really inviting us, Dorothy?" "Of course. My apartment is small, but we'll fit. It'll be good to have the kids' laughter here." After the call, I sat on the balcony, watching the furious waves break on the beach. Brandon's trial was scheduled for next month. The charges were serious: fraud, forgery, use of false documents, association with criminal organization. Patty estimated a sentence of at least 10 years. I'd agreed to testify, not for revenge, but for justice. For me, for Heather, and for all the others Brandon had deceived over the years. The phone rang, pulling me from my thoughts. It was a number I didn't recognize. "Dorothy Mitchell?" A male voice, unfamiliar. "Yes. Who's calling?" "This is Rodrigo Mendez, your son's attorney." I felt a tightness in my chest. In recent months, Brandon had changed attorneys several times, each promising legal miracles that never materialized. "What can I do for you?" "Brandon would like to propose a deal. He has information about larger operations that may interest the DA in exchange for a reduced sentence. But he needs your help." I took a deep breath, already imagining where this was going. "What kind of help?" "Financial, naturally. To cover fees for a specialized legal team. 200,000. I almost laughed. The audacity was incredible. "Mr. Mendez? I no longer have that amount. And even if I did, I wouldn't use it that way." "Mrs. Mitchell," his tone hardened, "your son is facing more than 10 years in prison. As a mother," I interrupted. "I've done what I could for decades. Now Brandon needs to face the consequences of his own actions." There was a long silence on the other end. "He said you'd respond that way. He asked me to tell you that he still has copies of documents you signed. Documents that could implicate you in some of his schemes." My stomach knotted, but I kept my voice firm. "Tell my son that blackmail is one more crime to add to his list. And that I'm willing to face any accusation if it means finally breaking this cycle." I hung up with trembling hands. I immediately called Patty and told her about the conversation. "He's bluffing," she assured me. "Any documents you might have signed, we've already clarified with police that it was under manipulation. Plus, the investigation has already established a pattern of behavior on his part." Still, that night was difficult. I lay awake, mentally reviewing every paper I'd signed over the years at Brandon's or Robert's request. How many contracts? How many powers of attorney? How many documents I'd barely read, trusting that my husband or son had my best interests in mind. But something told me Brandon wasn't done yet. And I was right. The next morning, I woke to knocking on my door. It was Detective Morgan again, accompanied by another officer. "Mrs. Mitchell, we need you to come with us to the station. There's been a development in your son's case." On the way, the detective explained. Brandon had attempted to bribe a guard to smuggle a cell phone into his cell. The guard, part of an internal operation, had recorded everything. At the station, they showed me the transcript of a call Brandon intended to make as soon as he had the phone. It was to one of the men he owed money to, offering my address in San Diego as a guarantee that I'd pay his debts. "My mother has money hidden," the transcript read. "If I can't pay, you know where to find her." I read the words, feeling a cold that seemed to come from inside my bones. My own son was willing to put my life at risk to save his own skin. "Mrs. Mitchell," the detective spoke gently, Considering this new evidence, we're offering temporary police protection and strongly suggest you consider changing residences. I went home escorted by a police officer. Patty was already there, having been informed by the detective. She hugged me as soon as I entered. I'm already looking for a new place for you. A gated community with security. I looked around my small apartment, at the plants I'd cared for so lovingly, the colorful curtains I'd sewn, the ocean view that brought me peace every morning. No, I said, surprising myself. I'm not running again. I won't let Brandon continue controlling my life, even from behind bars. Patty looked at me with a mixture of concern and admiration. Dorothy, these men are dangerous. I know, and I'm going to take all necessary precautions. But this is my home now, the first one I truly chose for myself. I'm not giving it up. Over the following days, we installed a complete security system. Cameras, alarms, reinforced locks, police increased patrols in the neighborhood, and 2 plainclothes officers took turns in a car parked in front of the building. Heather called me in a panic after being informed about the situation. Dorothy, come here. Stay with us, please. I'm safe, dear, I assured her. And I have a life here now. My craft fairs, my friends, my swimming classes for seniors. I laughed lightly. At 68, I finally discovered who I am. When I'm not taking care of ungrateful men. A week later, when the initial panic had subsided, I received an official envelope. It was a summons to testify at Brandon's trial, scheduled for 2 weeks away. Patty, who'd stayed in San Diego with me, reviewed the document. Are you ready for this? Facing him in court won't be easy. I looked out the window at the ocean that had become my confidant. I'm ready. But what I didn't know was that the trial would bring one more surprise. One that would change everything. The courthouse was an imposing building in downtown Phoenix. I returned to the city for the first time since my escape, feeling a strange disconnection from the streets that had been my home for decades. Patty drove while I watched the urban landscape pass by the window. Nervous? She asked when we parked. Surprisingly, no, I replied. I feel like I'm closing a chapter. Finally, in the courtroom, I sat next to Patty in the first row. The prosecutor, a middle-aged woman with shrewd eyes, came to greet us before the session began. Mrs. Mitchell, your testimony will be crucial today. Brandon is trying to present himself as a victim of circumstances manipulated by more powerful partners. He was always good at playing the victim, I commented. The side door opened, and Brandon entered, escorted by 2 guards. He was thinner, his face marked by deep circles under his eyes. Our gazes met for a moment, his pleading, mine firm. The judge entered and everyone rose. The trial began with procedural formalities, followed by testimony from forensic experts who detailed the complexity of Brandon's financial schemes. When they finally called my name, I walked to the witness stand, with slow but determined steps. After the oath, the prosecutor began. Mrs. Mitchell, can you tell us about your relationship with the defendant? I looked directly at Brandon as I spoke. I raised him alone after my husband's death 10 years ago. Before that, we lived as a seemingly normal family. Only seemingly. What do you mean? My husband, Robert, Brandon's father, was also financially manipulative and controlling. Brandon learned from the best. The prosecutor nodded. Can you detail how your son manipulated you financially? I told everything. The successive loans, the promises never kept, the emotional pressure, the veiled blackmail. In the last episode, he demanded $250,000, practically all my savings, to supposedly pay a debt of his wife's. When I realized I'd never see that money again, like I didn't see the previous amounts, I decided to leave. What made you make that decision after so many years of giving in to his demands? I thought for a moment. It was the contempt in his voice, I answered honestly. When he said, "Don't disappoint me, Mom," I realized he didn't see me as a person, only as a resource to be exploited. At that moment, something inside me broke and reassembled in a different way. Brandon's attorney stood up for cross-examination. He was a middle-aged man in an expensive suit with a calculated expression. "Mrs. Mitchell, do you consider yourself a good mother?" The question caught me off guard. I saw the prosecutor begin to object, but I raised my hand slightly. For decades, I believed being a good mother meant giving my son everything: money, time, self-worth. Now I understand that being a good mother also means teaching responsibility and consequences. "You abandoned your son when he needed you most," the attorney pressed. "No, sir. I stopped enabling destructive behaviors." "There's a big difference. What about the threats your son allegedly made against you? Don't you find it convenient that these allegations emerge just when he's about to propose a deal with the DA?" I maintained my calm, despite the insinuation. The recordings speak for themselves. And no, I don't find it convenient that my own son offered my address to criminals as collateral for his debts. I find it tragic. When I was finally dismissed, I returned to my seat with trembling legs. Patty squeezed my hand in silence. The trial continued with other testimonies: Brandon's employees, damaged clients, even Heather, who described years of lies and manipulation. Throughout, I watched Brandon becoming increasingly agitated, whispering furiously with his attorney. At the end of the day, when the judge announced a recess until the next morning, Brandon looked at me one last time before being taken away. There was no longer pleading in his eyes, only a cold hatred that made me shiver. At the hotel that night, I couldn't sleep. Brandon's expression haunted me. It was the same expression Robert had when he didn't get what he wanted, a mixture of rage and calculation, as if he were planning his next move. In the morning, we returned to the courthouse to hear the closing arguments. The prosecutor presented a compelling case, detailing years of fraud and manipulation. Brandon's attorney tried to paint him as a businessman in difficulties who made mistakes, but not intentional crimes. When the judge retired to deliberate, Patty and I went to get coffee at a nearby cafe. I was distractedly stirring my coffee when I noticed a man sitting a few tables away, watching us. When our eyes met, he quickly looked away. "Patty," I whispered, "that man is watching us." She looked discreetly. "Must be a reporter. The case has gotten some local media attention." But something about the man's posture, the way he avoided eye contact while clearly monitoring us, alarmed me. "Let's go back to the courthouse," I suggested. As we left, I noticed the man also stood up. On the way back, he maintained his distance, but continued following us. At the courthouse, I mentioned the incident to one of the officers, who promised to be vigilant. The session resumed with the judge returning to announce his decision. In the case of the state versus Brandon Edward Mitchell, this court finds him guilty on all charges. A wave of relief washed over me, followed immediately by profound sadness. My son, the child I'd once cradled in my arms, was now officially a convicted criminal. The judge continued, detailing the sentence: 12 years in prison with possibility of parole after 4 years, plus fines and restitution to those harmed. Brandon remained impassive during the reading of the sentence. When the guards approached to take him away, he turned in my direction. "This isn't over," he said loudly enough for me to hear. "You're going to regret this." As we left the courthouse, I noticed the same man watching from a distance again. This time I pointed him out directly to the officer accompanying us. The man noticed and quickly disappeared into the crowd. "We need to get back to San Diego today," I told Patty as we walked to the car. "I don't feel safe here." In the week following the trial, I tried to resume my routine in San Diego. Police protection had been reduced to periodic patrols, as Brandon's threat seemed less viable now that he was convicted and under constant surveillance. One afternoon, while returning from the fair where I sold my quilts, I noticed an unfamiliar car parked near my building. Something about the vehicle alerted me. Maybe the fact that the windows were too dark, or that it was strategically positioned with a view of the building's entrance. Instead of entering the building, I walked past and called Detective Morgan. "It might be nothing," she admitted, "but it doesn't hurt to check. Stay in a public place while we send someone." I entered a nearby cafe and waited. watching through the window. 20 minutes later, a patrol approached the suspicious car. Two men quickly got out and tried to walk away, but were intercepted by the officers. My phone rang. It was the detective. Mrs. Mitchell, we caught two individuals with criminal records. They were carrying unregistered weapons and had your address written on a piece of paper. I felt a chill run down my spine. Brandon's associates? Probably. We're interrogating them now. Do you have a safe place where you can stay for a few days? I immediately called Patty. Her response was quick and decisive. I'm coming to get you in an hour. We'll go to my beach house in Del Mar. Nobody knows about it. I went back to my apartment, escorted by police, to collect some essential belongings. While packing a hurried suitcase, I looked around at the home I'd built with so much care. Once again I needed to flee. Or maybe not. A thought began forming in my mind. An idea that would have seemed absurd to the old Dorothy, but now made perfect sense. When Patty arrived, I explained my plan. It's risky, she warned. Living in fear is riskier, I replied. And I'm tired of hiding. The next day, instead of hiding in Del Mar, I returned to my apartment. This time with a clear objective. With the help of Detective Morgan and her team, we prepared a trap. The two arrested men had been persuaded to cooperate in exchange for reduced sentences. They revealed that Brandon, using another inmate's phone during visiting hours, had hired a third person to give me a scare, a euphemism for something much more sinister. He doesn't want to really hurt you, the detective explained. He just wants you to know he still has power, even from inside prison. The plan was simple. I would maintain my normal routine, pretending to know nothing, while undercover police monitored every movement around me. When Brandon's hired man appeared, he would be arrested in the act. For 3 days I lived in a constant state of alert. Every noise made me jump. Every stranger on the street seemed like a threat. On the morning of the 4th day, while watering plants on the balcony, I noticed a man leaning against a post across the street, looking directly at me. Our eyes met briefly before I went back inside the apartment and signaled to the undercover officer posing as a cleaning lady in my living room. It's him, I whispered. I'm sure. The man remained watching the building for about half an hour. Then, slowly, he began crossing the street toward the entrance. The doorman, another undercover officer, let him in without question. I sat on the living room sofa, facing the door, and waited. My heart was beating so hard I could hear it in my ears. The police had hidden in the bathroom with the door slightly open. The doorbell rang. I took a deep breath and went to answer. Mrs. Dorothy Mitchell? The man asked. He was ordinary looking, someone who could easily go unnoticed in a crowd. Yes? I have a message from your son. Before he could make any move, 3 officers emerged from different points in the hallway, quickly subduing him. The man didn't resist, seeming almost relieved to have been captured. Later that day, Detective Morgan visited to inform me that the man had confessed everything. Brandon had promised to pay $5,000 for him to scare the ungrateful mother who abandoned him. And what exactly did scare mean? I asked. The detective hesitated. He was supposed to break some objects in your apartment, make verbal threats, and, she paused, leave visible marks on you. Nothing fatal, but enough that you'd never feel safe again. I sat down, feeling my legs weaken. That's enough for new charges against Brandon. Yes. Attempted assault. Hiring a third party to commit a crime. Threat. That will probably eliminate any possibility of parole in the next few years. A week later, I visited Brandon in prison. He seemed surprised to see me, as if he hadn't expected me to have the courage to face him again. I came to say goodbye, Brandon, I said when we sat facing each other, separated by glass. Goodbye? He frowned. Yes? The person you tried to scare confessed everything. You're going to face new charges and probably spend much more time here than you imagined. I paused, but I didn't come here for that. I came to say I'm moving forward with my life. Brandon laughed bitterly. What life? You're 68 years old, Mom. You're alone. I'm free, I corrected. and I discovered that it's never too late to start over. You know, I always defined myself as Robert's wife or Brandon's mother. Now I'm discovering who Dorothy is. He looked at me with a mixture of contempt and confusion. And who is Dorothy? I smiled, genuinely. A woman who finally learned to value herself. A woman who's no longer afraid. Brandon hit the glass. Frustrated. You think this is over, but it's not over. I'll get out one day. When that day comes, if it comes, I'll be prepared, I replied. I stood up. Goodbye, Brandon. As I walked out of the prison, I felt a lightness I hadn't experienced in decades. The sky was particularly blue that day. The air seemed sweeter. Patty was waiting in the car. How did it go? Liberating, I replied. Truly liberating. 1 year passed since my escape. Fall came to San Diego, painting the trees with red and orange. My small quilting business had grown. Now I had 3 students, older women like me, who came every week to learn and mainly to talk. Heather and the kids had visited me twice. Tyler and Emma filled my apartment with their laughter and energy, building sandcastles on the beach and collecting shells that now decorated my balcony. Heather was working as a teacher in her new city, slowly rebuilding her confidence. Brandon had been sentenced to 3 more years due to the intimidation attempt. News about him came occasionally through Detective Morgan, who'd become a friend. As far as we knew, he was quiet, perhaps finally accepting his situation. On a Saturday afternoon, while returning from the craft fair, I found a woman waiting at my building's entrance. She must have been about 50, with gray hair and a face that seemed vaguely familiar. Dorothy Mitchell? She asked, as I approached. Yes. My name is Christina. Christina Almeida. She hesitated. I was married to Robert before you. I was speechless. Robert had mentioned a previous marriage only vaguely, saying the ex-wife was unbalanced and obsessed with money. Ironies I could now appreciate. Would you like to come in? I finally offered. Sitting in my small living room with 2 cups of tea between us, Christina explained the reason for her visit. I saw the news about Brandon in the paper about how he manipulated you financially for years. She took a deep breath. Robert did the same to me. And when I read about you, I realized I needed to find you to close a cycle. How did you find me? It wasn't difficult. Your story spread among support groups for women who suffered financial abuse. You became a kind of symbol of resistance. I couldn't contain my surprise. Me? A symbol? Christina smiled. A woman nearly 70 who left everything behind and started over, facing her own son in court. Yes, Dorothy. You inspired many of us. We talked for hours. Christina told how Robert had isolated her from her family, controlled every penny, made her feel incompetent to deal with money. How when she finally managed to divorce, he left her with practically nothing, and then married me. A story that seemed to echo my own life. When he died, she continued, I felt a strange mixture of relief and rage. Relief, because he could no longer manipulate anyone. Rage because there was never justice. He never had to face what he did. I understand perfectly, I said. For a long time, I only blamed Brandon for his actions. But now I see that Robert planted those seeds. Our son just followed the example he saw at home. The cycle continues, Christina murmured. Unless someone breaks it. At the end of the afternoon, I exchanged contact information with Christina and promised to stay in touch. After she left, I stayed on the balcony, watching the sunset and reflecting on our conversation. Robert and Brandon, father and son, both now out of my life, one by death, the other by prison, both leaving scars I was still learning to heal. That night, I wrote in my journal, a habit I'd recently acquired. The words flowed easily. Today, at my 69 years old, I realized I spent most of my life trying to be what others wanted me to be. Devoted wife, selfless mother, personal bank, always available, always yielding, always afraid to displease. Now finally, I'm learning to just be and discovering that Dorothy is stronger, braver, and more capable than I ever imagined. The money Brandon extorted from me over the years, I can't recover. The years I spent in a suffocating marriage with Robert, I can't get back. But the time I have left, this is only mine to live as I choose, without fear, without manipulation, without regrets. The next day, I received an email from Christina. She'd spoken with other women who went through similar situations and suggested forming a support group. I agreed immediately. Our first meeting was at a cafe near the beach. We were 5 women, all with stories of financial and emotional control by husbands, sons, brothers. We shared our experiences, our pains, our small and large victories. At the end of the meeting, Patty, who'd accompanied me, suggested, "You should formalize this, create an NGO or something. There are many women out there needing to hear these stories, needing to know it's never too late to start over." The idea took shape quickly. Within a few months, Fresh Start was officially registered as a nonprofit organization dedicated to supporting women victims of financial and emotional abuse. Using my quilting skills, I created our symbol, a colorful phoenix, rising from the ashes. Our first public conference attracted more than 50 women. I got nervous going up to the small improvised stage, but when I started speaking, my voice gained strength. My name is Dorothy Mitchell. I'm 69 years old. For nearly 7 decades, I allowed others to control my life and my money. First my husband, then my son. Until one day, when my son demanded $250,000, almost everything I had, something inside me broke and reassembled. I looked at the attentive faces in the audience. It's never too late to say no. It's never too late to start over. And it's never ever too late to discover who you really are when you're not living for someone else's approval. The applause was deafening. 2 years after my escape, I received an unexpected letter. It was from Brandon, written in handwriting that seemed more contained, less impulsive than I remembered. "Mom, it's strange to write that word now. I think I lost the right to use it. I'm writing not to ask for forgiveness. I know I don't deserve it. But to say I'm doing therapy here in prison. The therapist made me see patterns I couldn't see before. How I repeated with you exactly what Dad did. How I learned to see people as resources, not as people. I'm not making excuses, just acknowledging the truth. And the truth is, you were right to make me face the consequences of my actions. I know you'll probably throw this letter away, and I don't blame you. I just wanted you to know that despite everything, I'm proud of what you've become. I saw your photo in the paper speaking to those women. You look different, stronger, Brandon." I read the letter several times, feeling contradictory emotions. Caution, because I knew Brandon's capacity for manipulation well. Sadness for what could have been. And surprisingly, a touch of hope. I didn't respond immediately. Instead, I took the letter to my next therapy session. Another healthy habit I'd acquired in my new life. "What do you want to do?" my therapist asked, after I read the letter to her. "I don't know. Part of me wants to believe he's really changing. Another part reminds me how many times I was fooled before." "What if both parts are right?" she said. "What if he is really trying to change, but it's still not safe for you to reconnect?" Those words stayed with me in the following days. Finally, I wrote a brief response. "Brandon, I received your letter. I can't say I trust your words. Trust, once broken, is difficult to recover. But I acknowledge your effort in seeking help and reflecting on your actions. My life now is centered on helping women who went through what I went through. I found purpose and peace in that work. I hope you also find your path. If it's a true path of change, maybe we can talk again one day, not as the mother and son we were, but as 2 people trying to do better. Dorothy." I sent the letter without great expectations. I didn't expect a response, and indeed, didn't receive one for months. That was okay. My life had taken its own course, independent of Brandon or the shadows of the past. Spring came to San Diego, transforming the city with vibrant colors. Our Fresh Start organization had grown, now with a small office downtown, and dedicated volunteers. Twice a week, we offered free financial education workshops, something I myself had to learn from scratch. At 68, Heather had become a frequent collaborator, sharing her own journey of financial and emotional recovery. My Saturday afternoons were reserved for my grandchildren, who now came regularly to visit. Tyler, almost 10, loved fishing on the pier near my apartment. Emma, at 8, had developed an interest in my quilting. "Grandma," she asked me one afternoon while we worked together on a piece, "are you happy now?" The question caught me off guard. I stopped quilting and looked at my granddaughter. Her curious eyes, her innocent face. "Yes, dear," I replied honestly. "Happier than I've ever been, even without Grandpa and Daddy." I chose my words carefully. Sometimes, Mariana, we need to move away from people we love to find ourselves. That doesn't mean we stop loving them. It just means we need to love ourselves too. She seemed to consider my words, her small eyebrows united in concentration. Like when I need to be alone in my room sometimes, even though I like playing with Tyler. I smiled, admiring her childlike wisdom. Exactly like that. In June of that year, I received an unexpected call. It was Detective Morgan. "Mrs. Mitchell, I'm calling to inform you that your son will be transferred to a work release program next month." The news caught me off guard. I thought with the additional charges, he's shown good behavior, completed rehabilitation programs, and his attorneys got a sentence review. He'll still have severe restrictions, but he'll be able to work during the day. I thanked her for the information and hung up, feeling an unease I hadn't experienced in a long time. Brandon would be partially free. What would that mean for me? For Heather, for the kids? I called Patty immediately. "Do you think I need to worry?" I asked after relaying the news. Patty, always practical, responded, "Let's increase your apartment security, just as a precaution. But honestly, Dorothy, I doubt he'll try anything. He'd have too much to lose." A week later, I received another letter from Brandon. Different from the previous one, this was formal, almost distant. "Dorothy, I'm being transferred to work release next month. I wanted you to know from me, not from third parties. I'll work on a reforestation project during the day, and return to prison at night and on weekends. I have no intention of looking for you or interfering in any way with your life. I learned my lessons the hard way. The therapist here says respecting boundaries is the first step to healthy relationships. I'm trying to practice that. I also wanted you to know, I've been corresponding with Heather about the kids. She agreed to let me write letters to them under her supervision. Maybe one day I can see them again. When she feels it's safe." Brandon, the absence of the term mom at the beginning and end of the letter didn't go unnoticed. He was really trying to establish a new dynamic, respecting that our previous relationship was irrevocably broken. I shared the letter with Heather in our next video call. She confirmed she was indeed allowing Brandon to write to the kids. The children's therapists believe it's important not to completely demonize their father, she explained. And his letters have been different. He asks about their interests, doesn't try to manipulate, doesn't make empty promises. "Do you think he really changed?" I asked. Heather shrugged. "Maybe. Or maybe he learned to be more subtle. That's why everything is supervised." She paused. "Are you going to respond to this letter?" I reflected for a moment. "I think so, to establish that I'm aware of the situation and that my boundaries remain intact." My response was brief. "Brandon, thank you for informing me about your transfer. I wish you well in this new stage. I'm glad to know you're in supervised contact with your children. They deserve a present father, if that father can be healthy and positive in their lives. As I said before, I found my path. I sincerely hope you find yours too, Dorothy." July arrived with intense heat. On a particularly sweltering Wednesday, I received an unexpected call. "Mrs. Dorothy, this is Sophia from the Correctional Rehabilitation Center. We have a situation with your son Brandon Mitchell." My heart raced. "Is he okay physically?" "Yes, but there was an incident at the workplace today. He had an argument with another inmate and, well, refused to retaliate when provoked. Actually, he walked away and sought out a supervisor. The problem is that this marks him as a target for other inmates. And we're concerned for his safety. What does this have to do with me? I asked, confused. Brandon requested a transfer to another project. Ideally, one where he can work alone or with direct supervision. We have an opening in an urban rehabilitation program, restoring a public plaza near your neighborhood. But we need your approval given the history between you. I was silent for a moment, processing the situation. Brandon had chosen not to retaliate, even when provoked. Something the Brandon I knew would never have done, and now he needed my help. Did he specifically ask to work near me? I asked cautiously. No, ma'am. In fact, when we mentioned a location, he hesitated and asked if there were other options. But this is the only project that meets his security needs, right now. That surprised me. Brandon was really trying to respect my space. What would be the distance between his workplace and my apartment? Approximately 15 blocks. He wouldn't have permission to leave the project area, which would be monitored. I took a deep breath. Okay. I give my approval. After hanging up, I questioned my decision. Was I being naive again? Or finally exercising compassion without compromising my boundaries? I called Patty and explained the situation. You did the right thing, she assured me. Keeping Brandon safe while he tries to rehabilitate doesn't mean lowering your defenses. It just means you're human and have compassion. In the following week, Brandon started his new job at the plaza. I purposely altered my route to the market to pass by there, maintaining distance. I saw him from afar planting young trees under the scorching sun. He was thinner, his posture less arrogant. For a moment he seemed to sense my presence and looked in my direction. But I didn't approach. Not yet. In August I received another letter. Dorothy, I know you saw me at the plaza a few weeks ago. Thank you for not approaching. And thank you for approving my transfer to this project. The work has been therapeutic. There's something deeply satisfying about transforming an abandoned space into something beautiful and useful for the community. I'm not asking for forgiveness or reconciliation. I just wanted to express gratitude for this small act of kindness that I wouldn't deserve. Brandon. The letter was different from the previous ones, more centered, less manipulative. I decided to respond with a symbolic gesture. The next day, I left a small box at the community center supervising the project. Inside were quality gardening tools and a book about urban landscaping. No note, no expectations. Weeks passed without response, and that was okay. I'd learned that healthy relationships don't demand immediate or calculated reciprocity. In September, our Fresh Start organization held a major event, a weekend workshop on financial independence for women. I would be the keynote speaker, sharing my journey from total dependence to financial autonomy. On the morning of the event, the hall was filled with nearly 100 women. I climbed onto the stage feeling that familiar mixture of nervousness and determination. Good morning, I began. My name is Dorothy Mitchell. At 70 years old, I'm learning who I am when I'm not being defined by the men in my life. The audience laughed gently, many nodding in recognition. 3 years ago, my son showed up at my door demanding $250,000, nearly everything I had. Like so many times before, he counted on my inability to say no, and as so many of you know, those patterns don't start from nowhere. They're cultivated over decades. In my case, it started with my husband controlling every penny, every decision, making me believe I was incapable of managing my own life. As I spoke, I noticed movement at the back of the hall. A tall, thin figure had entered discreetly and remained standing by the door. My heart accelerated as I recognized Brandon. For a moment I lost my train of thought. The audience noticed my agitation, some turning to see what had distracted me. I took a deep breath and continued. The most difficult and most liberating moment of my life was when I finally said no. When I walked out the door with only a suitcase and the determination not to be an extension of someone else's bank account anymore. I spoke for 30 more minutes, conscious of Brandon's silent presence at the back of the hall. He didn't try to approach, just listened. When I finished, I received a standing ovation. Women approached to share their stories, ask for advice, thank me. Brandon remained where he was, waiting patiently for the crowd to thin. Finally, when the hall was almost empty, he approached slowly. He looked uncertain, vulnerable in a way I'd never seen before. "Hi," he said simply. "Hi," I replied. "Your speech was powerful and painful to hear." He paused. "Thank you for the gardening tools." We stood in strange silence. Two people who'd once been so close, now practically strangers. "How did you know about the event?" I finally asked. "Heather mentioned it in a letter. I asked for special permission to come, just to listen." I nodded, noticing how he respected boundaries, asking permission instead of assuming rights. "Are you okay?" I asked, genuinely curious. "I'm different," he replied, after a moment of reflection. "Learning to live with the consequences of my choices. Learning to exist without manipulating or controlling." He met my eyes. "It's harder than I imagined." "It usually is," I agreed. Brandon looked at his watch. "I need to go back. I only have 2 hours of permission." He hesitated, then added, "You transformed something terrible into something meaningful." I'm, he searched for the right word. Proud isn't the right word. Impressed. Inspired. Maybe. As he turned to leave, I heard myself say, "Brandon." He stopped, turning toward me. "Would you like to have coffee someday? In a public place. Supervised." The surprise on his face was genuine. "I would, very much." "I'm not promising reconciliation," I clarified. "Just a conversation." "I understand completely," he nodded. "It's more than I deserve." A week later, we met at a busy cafe near the plaza where he worked. A correctional officer remained discreetly at a few tables away, part of the conditions of Brandon's temporary release. The conversation started awkwardly, both of us navigating new territory. We were no longer mother and son in the traditional sense, but two adults trying to find a new kind of connection. "How are the kids?" he asked after ordering coffee. "Good. Tyler is fascinated with astronomy lately. Emma is learning to play the flute." Brandon smiled slightly. "They always talk about them in letters. Heather sends me some recent photos." I took a sip of coffee, gathering courage for the question that bothered me. "Brandon, what happened? When did you start seeing people as just resources to be exploited?" He looked out the window for a long moment, his profile reminding me so much of his father that I felt a chill. "I think it was always like that," he finally replied. "Since I was a kid, I watched how Dad treated you, how he got what he wanted. It seemed efficient." He paused. "At school, at university, in business, manipulating people worked. Until it didn't anymore." "And now?" I asked. "Now I'm learning that efficiency isn't everything. That real relationships require reciprocity, not exploitation." He looked at me directly. "That people aren't means to an end." We talked for almost an hour. There were no great revelations or dramatic reconciliations. Just two adults sharing experiences, honestly, maybe for the first time. When we said goodbye, Brandon asked, "Can we do this again someday?" "Maybe," I replied, one step at a time. The next morning, as I walked on the beach with Patty, I reflected on the encounter. "Do you think he really changed?" my friend asked. "I think he's trying," I replied honestly, "and that's already more than Robert ever did." "And are you ready to forgive?" I watched the waves breaking on the sand, their eternal rhythm of destruction and renewal. "Forgiveness isn't something you give all at once," I finally said. "It's a daily practice. I'm learning to forgive him, and to forgive myself for allowing so much for so long." That afternoon, sitting on the balcony of my small apartment, I wrote in my journal, "Today, at 70 years old, I'm learning that life rarely offers perfect endings. There are no guarantees that Brandon really changed or that he'll continue on that path. There's no certainty that I myself won't fall into old patterns in moments of weakness. But maybe life isn't about perfect endings. Maybe it's about starting over as many times as necessary." About breaking toxic cycles, even when it seems impossible. About believing we can be more than our worst moments, or our most painful mistakes. The money Brandon demanded that morning 3 years ago was the price of my liberation. A high price, but infinitely less than the cost of remaining trapped in a life that wasn't really mine. Today, I'm not financially rich. I live modestly, earning enough selling my quilts and with small savings. But I'm immensely rich in other ways. In genuine friendships, in purpose, in inner peace, in courage I didn't know I possessed. And if there's one lesson I'd like to leave for my granddaughters, for all the women I meet through Fresh Start, it's this. It's never too late to say no. It's never too late to rediscover who you are when you're not living to please others. It's never too late to start over. At 70, I'm not ending my story. I'm just beginning to write the most authentic chapters. I closed the journal and watched the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and purple. Tomorrow would be another day of work at the organization, another opportunity to transform my pain into purpose, my experience into guidance for others. The doorbell rang. It was Patty with a bottle of wine. To celebrate, she said, entering. 3 years since you said no. 3 years of freedom. We smiled and toasted under the evening sky. To courage, I proposed. To Dorothy, Patty corrected. Finally, living her own life. As the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, I felt something I'd never felt in all my 70 years. Complete peace with who I was and who I was becoming. Not someone's wife. Not someone's mother. Not someone's bank. Just Dorothy. And that was enough. More than enough. It was everything.